Okay, let's dive right into this with a pretty chilling scene. It's the blistering Chicago summer of 1858. Imagine a heat so intense that horses are literally collapsing right in the streets, and the pavement is actually softening beneath people's feet. The city river is choked with green algae, and it stinks of sewage. It's so bad that people are walking around with wet cloths over their noses. In all this misery, the only affordable escape was cheap ice cream. It was sold on almost every street corner, cheap enough for everyone, and folks were eating it right there on the sidewalks or carrying it home in metal tins just to survive the scorching heat.
Now, 1,500 isn't just some random statistic. It represents the tragic death toll from a massive typhoid fever epidemic that struck the city that very same summer. Children and adults alike were struck down with high fevers and delirium. And when city officials finally tracked down the source, you guessed it, it was the ice. Vendors were cutting ice directly from the city's sewage-tainted lakes, packing it in sawdust and using it to freeze the very ice cream people were relying on for relief.
So leaves us with a pre-start question, right? How did a summer treat become deadly? To understand how people unknowingly bought toxic ice just to survive the heat, we really have to realize that this wasn't just a simple mistake. It was the direct consequence of supply and demand in a booming, totally unregulated market. To see how we got to that dangerous point in Chicago, we need to uncover the incredibly high-stakes history of this dessert.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are exploring the history of ice cream. We're going to trace its fascinating evolution from a fiercely guarded royal luxury all the way to a globally traded mass-market commodity. We'll see how engineering, chemistry, and sheer human persistence transformed what was once a highly exclusive secret into an everyday treat.
If you were to ask most people on the street where ice cream originated, they'd probably guess Italy or France. But instead of a modern European factory, we actually need to travel back thousands of years. We need to look at the first people who decided to take mountain snow and turn it into a culinary experience.
The real geographic journey of frozen treats spans entirely different continents and empires. It all started in the 7th century Tang dynasty, spread along the Silk Road into bustling Arab marketplaces, and then finally arrived in Europe centuries later.
The crucial contrast here is between the elite and the everyday. Back in 7th century China, Emperor Taizong enjoyed this fiercely exclusive frozen dairy dish made of buffalo milk, flour, and camphor. Camphor is actually an aromatic substance that creates a cooling sensation in the mouth. And get this, his chefs were sworn to secrecy under threat of severe punishment. But then, look at the 9th century Arab world. Vendors took a totally different route. They democratized their version, which they called sherbet, by mixing fruit juice, snow, and sugar, and they sold it openly in everyday city markets.
Now, as this made its way to Europe, a really famous myth was born. You might have heard the legend that a 14-year-old Catherine de Medici brought ice cream from Florence to France in 1533 with her Italian chefs. It's a great story, but culinary historians have never found a single 16th century source to back that up. Not one. That legend actually didn't even appear in print until the 20th century. Historical evidence shows it arrived far less dramatically, slowly making its way through expanding 17th century trade across the Arab Mediterranean.
So, let's move into our first section, European café culture.
In 1686, an entrepreneur named Francesco Procopio de Coltelli opened Café Procope in Paris. He took these frozen desserts and elevated them into an elite urban experience. He served them in elegant glass dishes, experimenting with flavors like fruit, chocolate, and newly imported vanilla. Eating ice cream there alongside massive historical thinkers like Voltaire and Benjamin Franklin, that was a clear sign that you belonged to the wealthy, educated elite of the city.
But despite all this incredible elegance, the dessert was fundamentally limited by one massive hurdle. You see, you literally cannot make ice cream without ice, and in the 17th and 18th centuries, ice was strictly a winter commodity. During the peak summer demand, there was a complete lack of ice, unless, of course, you were rich enough to maintain a private ice house. For centuries, this one limitation kept ice cream as a very occasional, highly luxurious treat.
Which brings us perfectly to our next section, Ice Kings and Hand Cranks.
In the early 19th century, this 22-year-old Boston entrepreneur named Frederick Tudor proposed a crazy idea, cutting ice from frozen New England lakes and shipping it down to the Caribbean. His own family absolutely refused to fund him, and Boston Magazine mercilessly mocked him. They joked that his next product would be bottled air. His first shipment to Martinique in 1806 was a total disaster, and he actually landed in debtor's prison. But Tudor didn't quit. He eventually perfected using sawdust as insulation and taught merchants how to store it, shipping ice as far as India and Australia, earning himself the title of the Global Ice King. But while Tudor provided the ice, it was an American woman named Nancy Johnson who completely revolutionized the kitchen in 1843. She patented a brilliantly simple process. By surrounding a metal container with ice and salt, the salt lowered the freezing point of the ice, which cooled the inner mixture much faster. The constant churning from her hand-cranked paddle prevented those gross, large ice crystals from forming, giving you a smooth dessert in just 20 minutes instead of hours. Astonishingly, though, Johnson sold the patent for her hand-cranked machine for just $200. She became an unsung hero of culinary history who dramatically simplified production and made homemade ice cream a practical reality for everyday families. But sadly, she never reaped the immense financial rewards that her invention generated. Moving right along to Section 3, Cones, Sundaes, and Chemistry. By the late 19th century, soda fountains were the absolute hotspot for young Americans to hang out. But there was a catch. Strict religious blue laws in many communities restricted the sale of carbonated soda fountain drinks on Sundays. So what did clever shop owners do? They simply removed the carbonated water, serving just the ice cream topped with flavored syrup. They even tweaked the spelling to S-U-N-D-A to avoid any religious association, creating the iconic treat we know and love today. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, chemistry was really taking over. In the late 1940s, a team of British researchers was looking to make ice cream production more efficient. Among them was a young chemist named Margaret Roberts, who, by the way, you might know better by her future married name, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Her team pioneered a method of incorporating more air into the mixture. This resulted in a larger overall volume, a softer texture, and way better stability during transport. This air injection technique directly led to the modern soft serve you get at fast food restaurants today. And that brings us to our final section, a global mass market. Now, an incredibly unique model developed in the 1930s Soviet Union. After studying American industrial manufacturing, the Soviets created something called plombyr. Its production was tightly regulated by strict state standards that mandated premium dairy fat over cheaper vegetable substitutes. It was such a high-quality dessert and so deeply beloved by citizens that foreigners visiting the country were shocked to see Russians eating it straight through the freezing winter. Today, the global appetite for this stuff is just staggering. While countries like the US, Australia, and New Zealand eat the most ice cream per person, China's rapidly expanding market has completely transformed the landscape. They now rank #1 in total global consumption, taking industrial ice cream from a relatively small footprint to a massive driving force in just a few decades.
And the industry hasn't stopped evolving either. To adapt to modern, health-conscious dietary preferences, companies are actively experimenting. We're seeing massive growth in plant-based and lactose-free ingredients like oat and coconut. Small companies and large manufacturers alike are utilizing futuristic flash freezing with liquid nitrogen, and even creating functional ice creams packed with probiotics. But to really comprehend this massive, modernized scale, we have to look back at a pivotal moment of pure serendipity, the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. Over 7 months, more than 20 million visitors flooded the gates. Ice cream vendors were entirely overwhelmed and simply ran out of paper cups. Enter Ernest Hamawi, a Syrian immigrant who is selling thin, waffle-like pastries nearby. He rolled one of his pastries into a cone shape, offered it up as a vessel, and boom, the waffle cone became an absolute instant sensation. That little spark of multicultural ingenuity at the World's Fair helped ignite an industry that is now worth an incredible $200 billion annually. It's a total economic powerhouse, comparable to the GDP of entire countries, selling billions of servings every single year. So it really all leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Through deadly mistakes in Chicago, royal secrets in China, unyielding persistence by a Boston Ice King, and a clever waffle cone at a World's Fair, the history of ice cream is truly the history of human ingenuity. Next time you order a simple scoop, will you taste the centuries of engineering, global trade, and sheer persistence that finally brought it to your cone? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking questions about the everyday things around you.